Here's Alex again with another code along. So today we better not see any code, because what we're going to try, I will explain in the next few minutes. We're going to use the REST outbound framework of Siebel CRM to send some data to an external service, which we mock up, and retrieve results. But we want to map Siebel data to the external world and send the request without any line of code. And is that possible? Yes or no? We'll find out. So let's start with a explanation what we're going to do. So there is a REST service somewhere out there. So an external REST API, and that provides, let's say, services for synchronizing account data and order data. We're just making this up as we go. Accounts and orders it is. So in Siebel we have, of course, accounts and orders. So we have a nice big Siebel database. And on top of that, we have Siebel servers. One is enough here. And of course, there's the AI on top of that and the user interface, but that's not really relevant right now because the integration is on the server level. But what we have alongside a Siebel server is another service, and that's the internal Tomcat, as it's called since 21.2. But I rather refer to it as SES Tomcat, the Siebel Enterprise Server Tomcat. And that's the sidecar service that runs along with every Siebel server that you have in the new Siebel architecture. And this is relevant because this Tomcat will make the connection to the external REST API. So let's make a connection here. There you go. So that's the actual, well, request going outbound and response coming inbound. And on the Siebel server, we need, of course, well, we need an object manager. And inside the object manager, there's a business service that runs as part of a workflow process, part of a script. And that business service is what we refer to in the outbound REST framework or outbound web services framework as the proxy business service. So that proxy business service is what we invoke in our workflow. And we, of course, send a payload with that. So at runtime, there will be an HTTP request to make the REST request from the Tomcat, and then the result will be sent back. And of course, we're sending data from the database that we retrieve using, for example, EI Siebel adapter. And we're sending that data, and the data we retrieve we can use to update data in the Siebel database. Okay, so that's the layout, the requirement, so to speak. And let's see the service first. So here I am on a JSON Placeholder free fake API website. Basically, I Googled for free REST API and I found this one. And this one's interesting because it's open source. You can run your own. I'm using the web service they provide. And you can send in any type of requests to a URL and you get, well, in my case, I get the same request payload back. So it's been processed or not, I don't know. It's a fake API, but it's real in terms you have to make a post request and you can, of course, use that in Siebel. So here's good old Postman. And I put together a payload here. So you notice I have post to that JSON placeholder URL using HTTPS, and I'm sending a raw JSON body. Now that JSON body is a bit complex, and that's for good reason, because we want to experiment and learn about how to deal with complex payloads. Siebel is not really one of the easiest hierarchies when it comes to data. You know, with the integration object hierarchies, we have list of something. And in the business world, we are with integration very often endpoint APIs, REST APIs have, let's call it, weird structures. So I made this structure up completely. So I'm passing in a message ID, a user ID, and then a body, and the body is an object, and the first item is a list of item, and this is an array, so making things maybe overly complicated, but you get the idea. And it's an array of objects, and then the first object is a list of account, so another array of objects, and that's the first account. It has an ID, has a name, and well, it has children, it has a list of orders, another array of objects. So there's the first order, there's the second order, there's another account here. It has no orders, so order list is empty. So that is a hierarchical data payload, but it's not a Siebel message. Nothing near a Siebel message. It's just what the external system that we fake expects. And let's try and send this in Postman. So we get a 201 created back. That's what the service does. And we just get our message. Well, we get it back. The payload we sent, we get it back without any modifications, except there's an ID, a fake ID 101 appended at the end. So this is how we can recognize, okay, it has been. So we have a 201 created, so that means the request has been fulfilled. And we have an ID, so we can, well, read that later in the workflow and say, and realize, okay, the synchronization or whatever of data has happened. So as we go along, we'll notice that we need to send this payload to the external system, and Siebel messages are different, so we need to map them. So in today's code along, we are going to explore how to use the standard business services like EI Siebel Adapter and Data Mapper. And the Data Mapper output is the input is a Siebel message, and the output will be the structure. And this structure will be passed to the proxy service. So this works perfectly fine. The JSON placeholder service works as expected, but we do not have one thing we would require to create an outbound proxy service. We do not have a OpenAPI or a Swagger description. So let's make a list of some pain points we have. Okay, so here we have complex hierarchical payload, and we have no Swagger or OpenAPI file. Let's just presume it. I mean, there could be one, but there is none. So we don't have that. So creating the proxy business service is difficult, to say the least. It's a challenge. And we need to map Siebel message to payload IO, or the proxy IO, which we do not have as well, because we don't have a Swagger file. Okay, so what shall we do? Well, the first thing that we can do is run this request from, let's say, Google Chrome, and capture the request archive file, the HAR file, HAR. And this file we can convert into OpenAPI. And that's a technique I show you here. You might find it useful or not. So most of the time you have the Swagger file and you just skip over what we'll see in the next minutes. But if you don't have a Swagger file, you might want to remember these steps, and it's just one way of doing it. I found it out, it works for me, might not work for you, but that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. So Postman helps me a lot in, well, generating some code. So here's the code area of Postman, and that's really useful. That's the stuff you really want. So I can get some JavaScript XHR or fetch requests here. Let's choose XHR. So the whole request is now in JavaScript, so I can run it from the browser JavaScript console. So let's copy it. Go back to the browser. You have to be on the same page because of the CORS, the cross, what's CORS? Man, cross object, something, cross origin, something. So Chrome would not play along if you don't have the base URL right, but okay. So we get to the developer tools. And let's clean up the console. And in the network tab, let's make sure we clean it up and just watch for fetch and XHR requests. So now in the console, I paste the request that Postman generated and just run it. And not unexpectedly, it returns the JSON. So the request worked. And in the network tab, I have the request. And I can see what happened. So that was posted, and there was a lot of headers in the response, which is important because we will see these headers in a bit and basically remove them. And there's the request headers that Google Chrome generated, and somewhere there's the payload. Yeah, there's the payload. You can see that we have an array of items, 2 accounts, etc. Okay, and there's the response. So that's fine, we can watch this all day, but here's the point. Now we can save this as an HAR file, export HAR. And that will prompt us just, okay, where do you want to place that file? So I've tested this before I started the recording, so let me just call this Siebel to placeholder _2. And I'm going to save it here on this mapped drive. So that's a remote machine and it's mapped to my local machine. So now I have an HAR file. So if you're new to this concept, Google a bit for HAR and see what these files contain. They basically contain all the request history. So what was the payload, etc. And what was the response and what were the headers and all that. So now comes something else. So we are on our way of creating a Swagger OpenAPI file. So because we don't have one. So if you have one, you can skip this, but we don't have one. So here I am in a site. I have a login, an account on API-Matic, or API-Matic. And API-Matic is a very cool tool, and I use it mainly to do these conversions that I show you. So API-Matic has, you need an account for that, of course. You need to get an account if you want to follow these steps, or you have your own account on a similar service. So there's a transform API. So I can upload any type of files, AHR, WADL, WSDL, Postman files, whatever. And I'm using this AHR file that I just created, and I'm going to upload it. So here we go. And I'm going to export it to OpenAPI Swagger 2.0 JSON. That's what Siebel Web Tools or Siebel Tools can read. So it's a conversion utility. Okay, file content empty. That's not good. Let's try again. So I'm choosing the file I saved before and then specify OpenAPI Swagger 2.0 JSON, because that's what Siebel Web Tools, the wizard, will be able to read. So we're converting the unreadable stuff for Siebel Web Tools into some readable stuff. Okay, that gives us some messages, no errors, so we can proceed and get the download here. So let's call it Siebel to placeholder 1.json. Okay, it's in the correct folder. So I used API-matic to convert the HAR file to a Swagger file. And now let's take a look at that Swagger file. So we're back on my training machine here and going to open so here's the let's move it to downloads and let's open it with Notepad. So what's in here? Well, it's a Swagger 2.0 file that describes the request structure and the response structure for that service. And the title, found this out because I've done it several times, the title will become the business service name. So instead of HAR imported API, I will just use, let's call it Black Sheep CRM, Siebel to JSON API. Okay, so that's going to be the name of the business service once the wizard has processed that. And the wizard will process the file and will create a method called post. Let's keep that name for the method. And now there are a lot of parameters, and they're taken from the original request in Google Chrome. So there's actually quite a lot, and we don't need any of them. So I just keep the method parameter, but let's just clean this up. So what I'm doing here, your mileage might vary, but we don't need all these parameters. So they have nothing to do with the request at all. So I'm just getting rid of them. Except, of course, the body parameter, which is the parameter that we're going to send. We have that payload in the body. So I'm keeping name method just for, well, to keep something, and I have to keep body. And you notice there's a reference to definitions request. So the request is important. That's going to generate an integration object. So the response is a 201. So it will generate a response integration object with the data. It has used the data to create an example, which is just fine. And then there are lots of response headers. And in our case, we don't care about these response headers. Maybe we would care about date and content length. But just to show some cleanup processes, and especially when you have like HTML descriptions or something in there, you have to clean that Swagger file up. So here I'm getting rid of all these headers that we don't really need for our implementation. Just keeping 2 headers for the sake of demo. Then security-wise, there's nothing much. The external service doesn't require security, so not bad for a sandbox test, but of course in real life there would be some security related stuff and you would have to keep that. Keep in mind that the Outbound REST framework in Siebel at the time of this recording, 22.1, only supports basic authentication by default. So to use, for example, OAuth or something else, you have to jump additional hoops. But we have no security here, so that's fine. And here's the request definition. So here's our, well, the initial request structure. And that's, well, that's separated in several other sub items here. So I'm not caring about that too much. The wizard will process that just fine. Okay, so that should be a good Swagger file. So this is a live recording. It's a code along. So we have, remember what we have done. We had a problem. We don't have a Swagger file for the Siebel wizard. We made a request using Postman, and we played that request in Google Chrome. We saved the HAR archive, and we converted that archive using another service to a JSON file, which we now have edited a little bit, cleaned up, etc. and saved. So at this point, you could say, yeah, I have a Swagger file. I'm fine. I want to generate a proxy service. So now it's time to go to Siebel Web Tools. I'm already logged into Siebel Web Tools, but we're going to, well, create a new workspace. So let's call this Siebel to JSON 001 S2J. Okay. And now I can run the wizard in Web Tools. So we are here on Web Tools 22. And the wizard, the web service wizard, has been introduced in 21.4, if I'm not mistaken. And 21.4 is the minimum required. If you have an older version, you have to use Siebel Tools to import the Swagger file. But we are using Web Tools here. So starting the wizard, and now here's the upload for the JSON file, the cleaned up JSON file. And we have. If we messed up anything, we will notice in a second when we click next. But it's looking good. Actually, there's a text area. Web designers help us here. Web service definitions to be generated. So there's a, oops, yeah, there's quite a lot. What's in there? Let's copy that. So that's what the wizard says right now. Web service definition, one web service definition, one proxy business service, and a response integration object, a body integration object, and other integration objects. Let's see how far we go with that. So we can submit this, and in our workspace, developer workspace, it will create these objects. So there's log files. Well, let's look at one log file here. And well, it just said it has done exactly what it has predicted to do. So we now should have a outbound web service definition. We can see that in the Siebel client. So here I am in the client application, going to administration web services, outbound REST services. There are several here, ignored. That's the new one. So here we can see it by the name. So this is data that has been generated, and we can see the endpoint address. So in any case, the endpoint address changes, whatever, we can go here, make the change. So the wizard has generated this. And the wizard has, of course, generated a business service. We have to click finish. Okay. Let's just reload that. Okay, so Had a bit of trouble with web tools, but now we're back and we are looking at the workspace we created. We imported the Swagger file, so let's look for the new business service. That's the proxy business service. Notice the class, REST outbound dispatcher, and so let's see what it has. Starting from bottom here, user properties. Okay, so those REST outbound dispatcher business services have a lot of user properties, including the web service name, which is the title that it retrieved from the JSON file. But the web service name is important, as this is the name of the outbound web service, outbound REST service definition. Then there are methods, of course. So as predicted, there's one method for the post verb called post. That's not a good name. We could change it, but let's keep it. And that method has arguments. So there's the method header that we kept, and it's not optional, so we just make it really, let's not use it, so inactive. But there's the response integration object, very important. So there's one integration object we have to really care about, and there's another one for the body. Notice the name, something called body in the body of the post request. So the second body is where it is, basically. And it's the IO5 integration object something, integration object 5, etc. So we'll look at this later. And then there's several method arguments that I found the wizard generates for handling security. And in real life, you would probably want to go for the security type basic and pass in name and password. That's what Outbound REST framework supports at the time of this recording. But we're not currently interested in the security stuff, so let's inactivate them. So that's perfectly legit, depending on what you intend to do later with the service. Not everything the wizard generates is what we need here. Okay, so let's recap. We have the input integration object type argument. We don't need that security URL. And we have the output. So let's keep things simple here. Input, output. And security we do not care about, because the external fake service doesn't really vary. But we could send in a authorization header or any other type of headers that the external system requires. All right, so that's the business service. And now let's look at the integration object. So to integration object we go. And it's an XML type, so it's an external integration object representing an external data structure. And yeah, it's that complex structure that we would have expected here. So there's a root element, there's the body, child of root, then list of item is child of body, list of account is child of list of item, and list of order is child of list of account. So that's the hierarchy. So let's check out the fields. So for root, there's the message ID and user ID that is like top of the hierarchy. And then there's the body, has no fields. List of item has no fields. List of account has, well, the account fields. In that case, only ID and name, but could be more. And list of order has amount, currency, and ID. So you see the structure matches exactly the request definition structure. And that's a good thing. So we have a very valid external integration object right now. So we have a proxy integration object. We have a proxy business service out of nothing, really. No, all that we have was a URL we're sending JSON payload to and getting JSON payload back. But now we have a proxy structure because we were able to generate a Swagger file. And let's stop here for a moment. What if you can't generate a Swagger file for the life of you, you can't import it, or it's too complex. There's always the EEI HTTP transport. You can use it manually to make any GET or POST request and send any payload. And of course, you get the payload back as a huge, ugly binary. And you have to transcode that into a string, and then you have to parse the string. So, or maybe convert it from JSON to property set and then parse it. Yeah, that's what you have to do if you don't have a proxy service. Maybe we do another code along with this option. So that's that. And now we want to send actual Siebel data to that service. So we need a Siebel message. And for the sake of, well, code along without any code, we're going to start another wizard and generate a Siebel integration object. So I've got Siebel tools here, and let's go and open that workspace we have created. There it is. So this workspace already contains the new proxy layer, let's call it that. Let's version that, so checkpoint. So that's Swagger import done. So everything we do is in version 2 now. And oh, I have to open that one first. Okay. And that was a mistake. So let's version that. Okay, so everything we do will be in version 2 now. And so we go to the wizard for integration objects. And we don't care about the project, pick the first one, and we care about the business service that generates the integration object, the EI Siebel wizard for internal integration objects, reading business objects. So the business object that we read is account, and the source root is account as well, and the name would be BCRM Siebel to JSON IO. Yeah, could be a better name, but let's keep that name. So the wizard does its thing, parses the business object, which is huge. So keeps it busy for a while. Generates some warnings. Yeah, let's ignore them. And in next, we do not want this. We do not want everything. We just want account and their entry orders, the business component for orders. Remember, account and orders are what we send. So with next, get all these calculated fields are inactive because they're, yeah, it's calculated. And so now our developer workspace will have in a few moments a new integration object definition. And there we go. So let's check it out. So it has two components, account and order entry orders as a child. And there are some things. Remember that ID field we passed along. We want to use the Siebel row ID, of course. And system fields are not automatically available as data in the integration object instance. So I'll show you what I mean. So if you look for the ID field, it's type system. So I need to change that to type data. I'm repeating that for the order business component as well. So now it shows up in the actual integration object instance. And account name, that's a field I can use for sure. And orders, we want to pass the amount or the total, order total, and the currency. So let's see if we have those fields ready. So anything with total in it. Oh yeah, a lot of calculated fields. It doesn't look too good here. There's the order total field, and that's calculated, so it's inactive, but let's activate it. So order total, so we can now use it. And let's look for currency. Currency code is active, so that's fine. And you would go along and spend some time modifying the keys, inactivating more fields, etc., etc. But this is a code along demo, and we're just fine with the integration object that we have. Okay, back to our workspace. Yeah, so here's the new integration object. So now we can start, building our flow. So we can use this internal integration object to retrieve data from Siebel. We'd use EI Siebel adapter and query. And then we use the data mapper and convert that Siebel message structure into the IO5 integration object. So we need a data map for that. So the question is, where do you start? So, and I'd say let's start with the data map. So, and we're still in a developer workspace, so we have to, we'll see what we get. But we have to definitely open that, inspect that workspace. I'm logging into a fresh session here in Siebel Call Center or whatever application you use, and open that workspace. And inspect it. So now the integration objects in that workspace are visible to the object manager and should hopefully pop up in the data map editor. So going out on a limb here, but I don't really want to deliver anything. I'm not ready. I'm still testing. So in the sitemap, we go to data map editor. That is. And create a new data map. Let's call it BCRM Siebel to JSON S2J. And what were the names of our integration objects? So the target one is BCRM S2JSON. The source, sorry, that's source. So let's start typing BCRM. Okay, there it is, S2JSON.io. If you see that, you're fine. So the pick list retrieves the data from the development workspace, which is A-OK. Then we have the target object, which was like IO5. There it is. Okay, that's a good start. So let's save that. And now the component map. So we have to follow the hierarchy. So there was in the target component, there's like 5, hierarchy of 5. So root IC5 was the upper one. So let's call this root, the root mapping component map. And in the source, we only have account and order entry orders. So account being the primary. So I'm using account here as the source component. And there's not really any relevant payload. Yes, oh yes, sorry, there is. Let's go back. Root IC5 has message ID and user ID. Okay, so let's add those fields. So in the target field, we message ID, and let's just make it up. We map to account here. So we have, for example, the account ID. Let's concatenate it. It's a source expression is like message underscore plus the row ID. And then we have the user ID. And let's just hardcode this. Let's hardcode this to 0-1 as admin's row ID or whatever. that could be security relevant on the other side or whatever. So it's just, we have some mapping here for the fields. And the next level was the body, the child of root IC5, and let's call this the body mapping, and we have to use account as well, and there are no fields on that level. And then we have the actual list of item level, so let's call this items, no fields there either. And now we have the account mapping proper. So account maps to list of account. And let's go back to web tools. We can confirm list of account has ID and name. So here we can map out the row ID of the account to the ID field. And the name, the account name goes into the name field. And then we have another one for orders. That's the order entry orders component finally. That goes into list of order. And we have some fields here. So we can use the row ID of the order, pass it to ID. Then we have the, let's find that using pick list. Total, order total. Order total goes into amount. And what else do we have? The currency. Currency code goes into the currency field. Okay, so that should be a valid map. Let's see if it's valid. It's validated. Yep, succeeded. Okay. So now we can convert a Siebel message with account and orders as children into the external structure that will feed into the proxy business service. Let's see if that works. So now at this point we could create a workflow, or we could start testing in the business service simulator. So I'm all for the business service simulator because it gives us a great idea how the business services work in input and output wise and how they interact. And later we can build a workflow. So in the application, with the developer workspace still open, that's important. We go to the business service simulator and let's simulate the flow of services. So the first service in the workflow would be the EI Siebel adapter querying for data. So we actually need data first. So let's go to accounts, account list, and I prepared some data. Yeah, worked ahead. So here you see I have a REST outbound example record ABC constructions, and that has an order. Let's find the other two. So that's the one without the order. Ah, there's one with an order. 2 orders. Perfect test record. So let's grab the row ID of that test record. And that's our test record for the business service simulator. Okay, back to the business service simulator. Now the service we need first is EI Siebel adapter with query and test case 1. We need input properties for the query, and we can use primary row ID. So pasting in the row ID of our test record, and we need the output int object name. That's the name of the output integration object, and that integration object is, we can grab it from Siebel tools here again, BCRM S2 JSON, so the internal integration object. Okay, so that has nothing to do with REST yet. It's just plain Siebel EAI. We have an integration object. We have EAI Siebel adapter. Let's see if this runs. And gives us a Siebel message, which is definitely good, and gives us zero errors and 1 record. So I'm quite sure this is fine, but we need this as input for the data mapper. So we move it to the input. That's test case 2 then. And I'm also saving it to a file. Going to rename that file. And that's the S2J01 Siebel message out. Okay, and let's take a look at this file. It's just the saved file. It's not the real data that's exchanged, but gives us, we have lots of fields there, and most of them we'll ignore in the mapping, but down here we have the, looks like order data and account data. Okay, I'm fine with that. So now the data mapper. So the second business service in the future workflow would be the EAI data transformation engine. Can we find it? Different display name. Here, EAI data transformation engine, and it has the execute method. And it needs a Siebel message. We already have that, but it needs a map name as well. So now the map name, I can't remember really. BCRM S2J, yeah. Okay, so that's an input argument. Map name, BCRM S2J. So that's the name of the map we just created. And now we're really testing our theory. Can we map from Siebel internal to that proxy integration object? We only know when we click run on one input. And no errors, so that's quite good. Let's check out that Siebel message. Okay, it says list of something something. Root, there's the root. I can see the user ID already and the message ID. I can see a list of body, I can see a body, I can see a list of list items. So this is now the convoluted Siebel hierarchy that the data mapper creates. List of account, list of account. There's the account, and should have 2 orders. Yep, looks like 2 orders. So a nice hierarchy of data, and that's hopefully exactly what the REST service wants. So the third step in our workflow, in our future workflow, is now the actual REST proxy. So which has the post method, nice name, and it gets the output of the data mapper as the input. So we moved it to the input. That's test case 3. Siebel message is the type here. Not sure if this works or not, but I tend to do the following. I tend to we can do this in Web Tools. The business service method is post. The argument is called body : body. So it expects the integration object hierarchy here. So I'm just going to rename Siebel message to the type to body : body, just for, well, have a better feeling about that. And that's the whole Siebel message here. So let's see what happens if we just send this over. And before we send it, there's one thing we have to do. I've already done this on this system, but I'm going to repeat the steps for your benefit. So we are making a call to an external system, right? So we have a diagram here even. So this call is HTTPS, so or TLS, Transport Layer Security. So the SES Tomcat will need to find the root certificate of the external server in its trust store. And let's make sure it does. So here I'm on the website, and I can use the browser clicking on the lock icon to see that is a secure connection. And when I open that, I see the certificate is valid. And when I open that, I see the certificate and the certification path. So there's an intermediate and there's a root certificate. And that root certificate is what the internal Tomcat needs to find in its trust store. All right, so click View Certificate here and Details. And we can copy that to file, keeping all the defaults and downloading it to, well, I already done it, so, but you save it as a file. Let's call it S2J root CER. Next, finish, OK. And we can close that. So now we have the certificate file on the local machine. And the next thing we need is, well, maybe Java key tool to import that certificate. I have the command here. So we need a JDK, need to point to key tool exe, import without any prompts as a trusted certificate authority certificate, alias S2J root. This is the file. It's right in the downloads folder here. This is the key store. And the key store is the application container internal Siebel cert, Siebel key store JKS, or whatever your name is for the key store. And that is the file it uses as the trust store. And that's the password of the key store. So this would be a one-stop request. And let's send it off in a command prompt. Certificate was added to key store. All we have to do now is to restart the internal Tomcat. So it kind of reloads that. So that should be fairly quick. Okay. And now we can go back to the simulator and try and run this. And what would you expect right now? Would you expect an error message, or would you expect the response to come back? We only find out when we click that button. And it says something weird. It says integration component body found in body for array representation is not of array type. So something is not something doesn't add up for the business service. And the reason is that it needs to know that we're actually sending in a Siebel hierarchy, a Siebel message, rather than a proprietary property set. And what I'm showing you here is a slide of the monthly updates that I do on YouTube. And just recently, actually in 22.1, there's the first release where this works. We have the Siebel hierarchy HIER input argument for the proxy business service set to yes. That you have to do to tell it, okay, this is a hierarchical input. You can actually see an example for this in a vanilla workflow. And so we can take a look at this workflow. And you might not find this workflow in your database. The reason is your database is a bit too old. It's not 22.1. And even if it's 22.1, you might not have run the repository upgrade the non-mandatory part of an update, which imports, well, repository data into your repository. And I've completed this whole process on this machine. And this is a workflow process of the new CrowdTwist CT, loyalty integration. And in this CrowdTwist integration, Oracle uses the data mapper. So you see here, just keeping this short, EI Siebel Adapter Query, querying contact data, then mapping it using the data mapper, and passing it to the Outbound service, which happens to be the proxy for the Oracle Cloud Server, the Oracle Integration Cloud. And if you look closely at the input arguments, you see the body is passed as the Siebel message that's coming, and we see the Siebel hierarchical input is set to yes. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the simulator now. So I'm going to add this property, input argument, to yes. And now, fingers crossed, it gets a Siebel message back. Yay, yay, yay. That might be touchdown already. So we have successfully mapped Siebel data to the external structure, successfully passed it to the external service, and we got a response. So let's see what we have here. So we have a response, a 201 response, and there's a list of response body and header. So in the header, yeah, lots of stuff here, but this is where you would look for any header that you want to, that you're interested in. Okay, but we're not interested in that. We're interested in the body. And the body has that, okay, you see the user ID, the message ID, and the ID that is unique to the response. So this is what I would be looking for in a workflow and say, okay, if we get an ID back, then this was successful. And there's also, of course, the body itself with the list of items. So that's just the data structure we sent, but let's pretend it's processed by the external system. So here's the list, here's the account, list of orders. So that, okay. So that was a perfect response. Let's just save it to a file and say S2J 001 response. So just saving it for later. All right, so we have all the ingredients ready to go from here. So here we stop the code along. So you can imagine using these 3 business services in a workflow process, delivering your stuff, of course, calling the workflow process from somewhere, adding other steps to interpret or parse the results. But yeah, that's what I leave up to you. So thanks for watching. Take care and bye-bye.